In this session, we study interaction among independent variables in the context of linear regression and logistic regression. An interaction is a combination of independent variables. Going through this session, we will understand the concept of interaction, we will learn how to incorporate interaction into regression models, and how to properly interpret results of regression analysis with interaction terms. This is the outline of the lecture. First, the general concept of interaction in regression models will be described. Then we will go through examples of 3 different types of interaction. The lecture will be concluded with some overall remarks. We studied basic models of linear regression and logistic regression, as shown here. The right-hand side of each equation has a simple mathematical structure, called linear combination. The right-hand side is a linear combination of independent variables denoted by x1, x2, and so on. Let's think more about the simplicity of this mathematical form. Look at beta 2 in each of the equations. In the linear regression model, beta 2 is the difference in y, corresponding to a unit difference in x2, holding the other x's fixed. In the logistic regression model, beta 2 is the difference in the logarithm of odds of the event of our interest, corresponding to a unit difference in x2, holding the other x's fixed. In both models, beta 2 is assumed to be always the same, regardless of the value of x2, regardless of the values of the other x's, and regardless of the value of y or the log odds. But this assumption may be an oversimplification. Beta second may vary with those values. For example, suppose that y in the linear regression model is the systolic blood pressure, abbreviated as SBP, x1 is a binary variable for gender, x2 is age, and beta 2 is estimated to be 0.5. Beta second may represent an expected increase in systolic blood pressure, corresponding to 1 year increase in age. Should this quantity be always 0.5? Not necessarily. We can think of 3 major deviations from the assumption that beta 2 should remain the same. First, for example, suppose that among people who have normal systolic blood pressure, their blood pressure increases at the pace of 0.5 per year of age, but among people who have high systolic blood pressure, their blood pressure increases at the pace of 0.7 per year of age. If so, the age-related increase in systolic blood pressure may be faster for those at higher systolic blood pressure levels. Second, suppose that age-related increase in systolic blood pressure is, for example, faster among older persons. If so, age-related increase in systolic blood pressure may be accelerated with age. Thirdly, age-related increase in systolic blood pressure may depend on other characteristics. For example, age-related increase in systolic blood pressure may be faster or slower for females than for males. All these 3 patterns can be called nonlinearity, because the right-hand side of the equation could not be a linear combination of x's anymore. In particular, the deviation patterns 1 and 2 are a sort of narrowly defined nonlinearity, and the deviation pattern 3 is called interaction. The word interaction is widely used in our everyday life and in different fields of science, with different meanings. But it has a specific meaning in statistics. It is closely related to what is called combination effect or synergistic effect in scientific literature. In the context of the multiple linear regression model, suppose there is an interaction between 2 independent variables, xj and xk, in relation to the dependent variable y. If there is an interaction between xj and xk, the expected amount of change in y, corresponding to a unit change in xj, is not independent of xk, but varies with the value of xk, and likewise, the expected amount of change in y associated with a unit change in xk is not independent of xj but varies with the value of xj. In this case, xj and xk are not additive in relation to y. If xj and xk are considered to causally affect y, we can use the term effect modifier. Xj may be considered an effect modifier of xk, because the effect of xk on y, that is, change in y produced by a change in xk, depends on xj. Or xk may be considered an effect modifier of xj because the effect of xj on y, that is, change in y produced by a change in xj, depends on xk. It is important to note that in this slide, we think about 3 variables together. Y, and 2 independent variables, xj and xk. There are many possible mathematical forms of such a 2-factor interaction, but the most basic and most widely used form is a product of the 2 variables, like xj times xk. Interacting variables may be numerical variables or binary variables. In a 2-factor case, one may be numerical and the other may be binary, or both may be binary, or both may be numerical. Later, we will look at an example for each of these three combinations. If both xj and xk are binary variables, it is enough to consider this multiplicative form. How do we incorporate an interaction term, particularly in the multiplicative form, in a regression equation? Let's look at the first equation, in which two independent variables, x1, x2, and their interaction are adopted. The model is expressed as y equals a constant plus beta 1 times x1 plus beta 2 times x2, plus beta 3 times x1 times x2, or namely, beta 3 times the product of x1 and x2. If x1 and x2 are considered to causally affect y, the model means that we cannot think of the effect of x1 and the effect of x2 separately, because the combination of x1 and x2 has a potentiating effect on y. The three equations shown here are mathematically equivalent and are different expressions of the same mathematical relationship. But the second and third equations draw our attention to possibilities of different interpretations from that of the first equation. In the second equation, the difference in y corresponding to a unit difference in x2 is expressed as terms in the parentheses, beta 2 plus beta 3 times x1. An interpretation may be the effect of x2 on y depends on x1. In the third equation, the roles of x1 and x2 are switched, so the effect of x1 on y depends on x2. Well, then, which one of these three interpretations should be taken? It depends on what x1 is, what x2 is, and what y is. It depends on substantive aspects of the research question. This slide shows three different expressions of a linear regression model with an interaction, but the same is true for logistic regression models.